Thank you, Mr Speaker. Kia ora koutou. Mr Speaker, the budget is very much a document about money. It's a very practical document, but it's also a way by which a government can express its vision. It can share its vision for this country by the way in which it assigns funding. And each budget has its own unique character, something that defines it and differentiates it from other years. And this year's budget will clearly enter the record as the inequality budget, about a singular statement that it's okay to transfer wealth from the least well-off to the most well-off. And that's a very unfortunate vision for this government to have. It's not the vision we've been hearing spoken of, but we must go by what people do rather than what they say. We're told this budget is about improving growth, improving the country's economic performance. But it's very hard to see anywhere in this budget any net benefit for the small and medium enterprises, the SMEs, which are actually the heart and soul of this country's economy, always have been, and we can expect that they always will be. The big headline treat, of course, on offer, the lollies, as it were, for business, is that cut in the tax rate for companies and for high-income earners. But of course, as any hard-working small business owner knows, in order to make tax, to pay tax, you must first make a profit. And that's been a very difficult thing for many of our smaller businesses to do over the last year or two. And really, there's not a great deal in this budget what will help them to achieve that tax and to start, in fact, paying any tax at all. We're told that the figures tell us, in fact, that the tax cut will leave on an average about $365 million a year in the pocket of businesses. And on the face of it, that's a good thing. But what we've heard less about is the fact that the rise in other costs will quickly erode the value of that cut. In fact, that erosion has already begun. The rise in the ACC work levy will come out at about $150 million a year, something like 40% of the tax cut gone before businesses even see it. That 40% increase in the ACC levy based on the back of an entirely bogus ACC crisis, so-called crisis, which has been manufactured by the ACC minister over the last year. The increase in GST will hurt business, and we know this. There will be a one-off cost, particularly to our smaller retailers, and indeed all retailers. The one-off cost of changing computer systems and relabelling, but also an ongoing consumer resistance as retailers will need to renegotiate, to reassess pricing points for various products. Either the businesses will lose because they'll endeavour to absorb the cost, or consumers will lose because retailers will feel obliged to put up their ticket prices. And a recent survey of over 400 retailers revealed that more than 80% of them expect the rise in GST to be bad for business. We know that SMEs had no opportunity to comment or to inform the Minister or the Government on the potential effects of GST because we asked the Minister the question, and he confessed that prior to making decisions about GST, there was no consultation with small business, there was no acknowledgement, there was no opportunity for them to say their piece or to influence that decision. This is very much a business-as-usual budget. It tweaks here and there. It changes things around the margin. But it completely misses the point that business as usual is not an option given the changes in the national and the international context in which our business people must operate and will operate into the future. The market nationally and internationally is crying out for products that deal with the very new challenges we face, the challenges of climate change, of peak oil, of the change in preferences and expectations of consumers, both here and overseas, and in particular in the high-end consumer markets, those who have a disposable income, those who have choices about where they spend their consumer dollar. This is where the way of the future is for New Zealand, and there's very little in this budget that in any way will fulfil the vision of building an economy, a business sector that can meet these new needs. We know there's demand for safe food, for organic food, for novel fibres. We know this because some of our small and not so small business people are already endeavouring to meet that demand. One of the keys to unlocking the potential of our economy is in research and development and finding new products, new materials, new processes that are resource efficient, that are environmentally benign, or that in fact enhance the environment and that meet the demands of socially responsible consumers. And in New Zealand as elsewhere, consumers are becoming more socially and environmentally conscious. Research that has been done in New Zealand tells us that over a third of consumers now look at the environmental and social characteristics of a product before they purchase that product. And that number has been growing demonstrably over time. And research that's been done over the last decade or so tells us that. The so-called low-HAS consumers, lifestyles of health and sustainability. There's even an acronym for these people. In the US, in North America, in Japan, in Germany, and indeed here in New Zealand. This is the growing market for New Zealand manufactured, designed products. And nothing in this budget contributes, supports the businesses, the innovation who might help to meet this growing demand. Mr. Speaker, SMEs in New Zealand, the small and creative businesses, have historically been the producers of ideas and innovation. We'll look in vain for any real assistance in this budget. The increased funding for research that is in there, the so-called new funding of $321 million, in fact, a significant chunk of that was actually stolen from environmental research. Reprioritisation, I believe, is the phrase that's been used. We are already underinvesting in environmental research. We were embarrassed when we produced our first State of the Environment report in 1999, that the most common phrase in that report was, "We don't have the information, we don't know." The second environmental report in 2007, the situation had not improved. This country lives and dies by its green brand, its 100% pure brand. That is what our economy rests on. If we don't do the basic environmental research and monitoring, we will lose the integrity of that brand, and our markets will diminish accordingly. To suggest that new research funding is supporting the business endeavours, when in fact a large chunk of it is removed from a key area of government activity, is something of a sham. In any case, the research funding that has become available is very much targeted to the large companies, those with a track record in research, those with a large spend already. And I don't think that those companies ought not to be supported, but really relatively small amounts of money could be dispersed to small growing businesses, and the voucher system that's proposed we see as being overly bureaucratic, difficult. Most businesses will look at that and think the opportunity cost of applying for those small amounts of funding simply won't be worth the candle, and the likelihood is it will be underutilised. This is a time when the government should be investing as it never has been invested before in support for companies who are wanting to break in to new products, new markets, new innovations. And the government should know this, because a matter of weeks, within a month of this government being elected, the Prime Minister was written a letter by some of New Zealand's most successful and well-known business people, and they were pleading with him to grab the vision of green technology, of new technologies that will deal into the future with the very real problems that are faced locally and internationally. People like Philip Mills, who took a successful local business and turned it into a larger and very successful international business. People like Jeff Ross, who developed 42 Below from very humble beginnings. People like Jeremy Moon, who saw the opportunity in the research around fibres being done and turned that into a multi-million-dollar international business. People like EcoStore. A gentleman and his wife started making soap by hand at Mangawhai, and they now have product in every supermarket in the country and are exporting to the US and the UK. And these success stories were in part built on support that was coming from the previous government, through funding streams to support NGOs, to support environmental development agencies, in large ways and small. There was active support from the government to enable these companies to grow, to just fill the gap, and critically to ensure them that they were actually supported by the government. The challenge for this government now is to demonstrate that it does have some vision. to model best practice around government procurement, around its own actions, not to talk about supporting business and critically small business, but to actually put the policy settings there, to put the funding there, to put the practical assistance that will grow our small companies, grow our economy and really give us some genuine growth, some genuine prosperity that this country needs. Growth which is sustainable, growth which meets the needs of current demands. Kia ora koutou.